Hi, everyone. I'm Thomas Murray, and thank you for tuning in to Equitech Futures Interview Masterclass. Now, whether you are interviewing for a job, a graduate program, or one of our institutes at Equitech Futures, I recognize that the act of interviewing can be daunting. So let's talk about it. But first, let me get a couple of stipulations out of the way. You may be asking yourself if I can guarantee that you will get a job by following these suggestions. And I cannot guarantee that. And so, fine, you might be thinking, at least, Thomas, can you guarantee that if I follow your advice, that I can get a seat in an Equitech Futures program? And that's not entirely in my power either. Why? Well, because unlike a cheat code on a video game, there's no secret password that unlocks new levels of jobs and admissions opportunities. My colleague, Abhilash Mishra, the founder of Equitech Futures, serves on the selection committee for a prestigious international scholarship. And I once overheard him counseling a student who had wanted to know beforehand what they should say in their interview so that they too could win that scholarship. As if saying the word banana 3 times in response to the 5th question was going to be the gateway to prosperity and success. There is no easy hack. There is no guarantee. In each interview that you sit for, you still have to bring your whole self into that experience. That means bringing your curiosity, your personality, your experience, and your brain. And no one can tell you exactly what to say because each time you sit down for an interview, you will likely be sitting across from someone different, someone who is seeking different things from different people for different opportunities. So am I saying that interviewing is an exercise in futility? No. There are a handful of techniques that I think will set you up better for success. But keep in mind that these are my opinions on the matter. I have interviewed thousands of people over the course of my career for all kinds of roles, from the types that actors play upon the stage to seats that students desire in our institutes at Equitech Futures. And if you are an Equitech alum watching right now, well, there is a rather excellent chance that I was among the panel to interview you for whatever Equitech program you graduated from. Oh, so back up for a second. Who am I? I'm Thomas Murray, and I'm the Chief Community Officer here at Equitech Futures. I'm also a core faculty member teaching both the speaking lab for the Equitech Scholars Program and the Applied Data Institute. And I also teach the Community Action Lab for the Civic Tech Institute. I have a Master of Fine Arts degree from Virginia Tech, which is a polytechnic institute, but I was not trained as a scientist. I was trained as an artist. Yet, the bulk of my creative career has been as an ethnographic researcher, working across disciplines in the dramatization of data. And throughout, I have been a teacher of performance. How we represent ourselves to others has been at the core of my study and my practice. And an interview is a capsule-sized opportunity to represent who you are to others who do not know you yet. In any sort of dialogue, I think it's useful to have an idea of who the speakers are. And we will spend a lot of time in this masterclass focusing on you, the person interviewing for an opportunity. But I want to start by imagining the interviewer, the person that you're sitting across from. When it comes to job interviews, grad school interviews, and scholarship opportunities, it's really easy to focus on yourself, right? You want the job. You want to get into the master's or PhD program. You want the scholarship. And so in an adversarial way, it's easy to imagine the person across from you is a gatekeeper. They have the precious resource, and their job is to figure out why they should deny you, why they should keep you from the opportunity, why you're not good enough for it. This is an impoverished narrative. I say that it is an impoverished narrative because it sets up the interview into a conflict scenario before it's even begun. It casts the people on both sides of the table into stereotypes. The virtuous striver hoping for an opportunity, and the privileged and perhaps devious manager who is hoping to say no. The reality of an interview scenario is that both people on both sides of the table have a problem to solve. There is an opportunity, a job, a seat in a graduate program, a scholarship, and there are applicants vying for it. Now, the interviewer has a job to do. They have to hire someone for that job and admit a cohort into their program or award that scholarship. Maybe they can only choose one person for that opportunity, or maybe they can choose 30. We forget sometimes on our side of the table that it's very, very, very unlikely that the interviewer is going to deny absolutely everyone the opportunity. They have to pick someone or some group of people and make an offer. So rather than framing the interview as a way for that interviewer to pick you apart and see how you're all wrong or undeserving of the opportunity, understand that most interviewers are hoping that you'll be the right candidate for the opportunity. Because if they meet you and you turn out to be the type of candidate that they're seeking, well, then their job can be done. And successfully, they can offer you the opportunity. Now, why do I frame the story in this way? Why cultivate empathy for the interviewer? Because from time to time, I see applicants come into the interview already somewhat defeated. Somewhere along the way, I can sense that they psyched themselves out of the competition. That they are showing up for the interview, yes, but that they've already told themselves that they're not going to get it. Don't do that. I hate to say it, but we are oftentimes the worst judges of our own character. And too often, we are our own worst critics. And you know that internal voice I'm talking about, right? The one that says, you know, maybe they just gave you an interview because they feel sorry for you. Maybe there's some quota they're trying to fill. And so they only gave you an interview so that they could say that they gave you one. There are so many peers of yours out there in the world who went to better schools or got better grades, or they were more favored by their professors. And some of the faculty who are interviewing me went to those better schools, and they're going to see right through me. I just need to make myself small and get this over with so that I don't waste any more of their time. Anybody know that internal voice? There is no room for negative self-talk before an interview. That voice needs to be banished from the waiting room in the minutes before you begin your interview. That voice is not productive. That voice comes from your hurt, not from your potential. And if you know that voice, then you know that getting rid of it completely may be a long, hard road. But I'm telling you that you can tell that voice to go away for the 30 minutes that you need to show up for your interview. And so who is showing up? Ideally, it's your best self. But don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that you should imitate some character you saw on TV or someone you admire in a movie. You're not playing pretend. Your best self is you. It's the richness of what you studied in school. It's the curiosity for the things that interest you. It's that sense of humor that you've developed over the years. It's the jobs you've had before and the ways that you volunteered your time, which combines into a thing we call experience. It's the respect that you show not just to your elders, but everyone around you. It's the relationships that you have in your life, those people who have your back and who believe in you. And it is the earnestness that you are ready for that next opportunity. We are all the leading characters in complex narratives. And no matter what the plot points are in your story, the authenticity that it is yours is a big asset. Now, we may be growing more and more into an AI-driven society with ChatGPT telling us what is right and wrong. But I'll tell you, no machine, no algorithm knows more about your life and what you want than you do. Preparing for an interview is putting your experiences and your ambitions in order so that when the right opportunity comes along, you are prepared to meet it. Now, there are some best practices to keep in mind, and I think they wind up being helpful no matter what your background or experience is. So let's jump into them, shall we? First, arrive on time. This may seem super obvious to some people, but the practice of time and the culture of time holds different values in different places. To some, timeliness is a rule, never to be broken. And in some cultures, it's more of a suggestion, and it can be more flexible. In the case of an interview, however, I think it's best to err on the side of being there at the starting time, if not even a couple of minutes early. With a Zoom interview, you likely have a good amount of control of when you choose to join the waiting room. But if your interview is in person, you should account for bad traffic, for delays, even the possibility of getting lost if you're going someplace for the first time. You don't want to keep your interviewers waiting for you if you can help it. The interview itself is a subtle test of accountability, after all. If you can show up on time for an interview, there's a reasonable likelihood that you can also show up on time for work or for class. Whereas if you miss that start time, it sends a signal that you might not treat the opportunity you're applying for with as much diligence and respect. When we interview finalists for an Equitech Futures program, the faculty stacks interviews with different candidates back to back to back. It is a grueling schedule. So if you are late joining your scheduled interview time, you're really just deducting from the time that has been afforded to you to allow us to meet you. More than a signal of promptness or lateness, we will have less information to go on about whether to choose you for the program when our time has been cut short. We cannot run over time, or else we unfairly shortchange the next applicant. So do yourself the favor of showing up on time, and then all of that time can be afforded to getting to know you. Second, if you can, pour yourself a glass of water before the interview, or have it at your side. If it's an in-person interview, the person showing me into the conference room or the human resources office has almost always asked me if they can get me something, and I will ask for a glass of water. Two reasons, and the first one is obvious. Sometimes when we are asked something unexpected, or we are facing that moment of engagement, we may feel anxious. On a primal level, something akin to our fight or flight instincts have been activated, and our bodies can shift fluids away from our saliva and our mouth and redistribute it as sweat. Certain medications also have that effect. Sorry if that sounds gross. Well, enter the glass of water, which can relieve those symptoms and provide some calm. You don't need to be a medical professional to know that when our bodies are made up of about 60% water, then they are pleased when they are replenished with more water. The other use of that glass of water is when you are asked a stumper of a question. Maybe it's a question in multiple parts. Maybe it touches on an experience that you're not super keen to share, or maybe it pokes at a weak part of your resume or experience. Aside from being nourishing to take a drink of water, it also buys you time. You might respond with a light acknowledgement like, "That's a good question." Then reach for the glass, take a good long sip, and then put the glass down. And you've just bought yourself 10 seconds with poise and grace to think about your answer without having to go through the awkwardness of, can I have a moment to think? Which brings me to my third point. Silence is okay when you're thinking. Again, this gets tethered to anxiety and that voice inside us that says, oh no, what are you going to say? We have to say something, so just start rambling, say so that they know that you're thinking, that's a good question. Gee, well, as opposed to, I think an example of that would be ... Did you sense the difference in poise between those? You can think both silently and actively. I recognize there's a danger when we're interviewing on Zoom that the interviewers might think that our screens have frozen if you don't say something. And you can ameliorate that concern by moving slightly while you're thinking. Even just slightly moving your eyes communicates that you're actively recalling a memory that you'd like to share. Number 4, when you get asked a question about your prior experience, seize the opportunity to cite a real example from your work history and tell a story if possible. Generalities about how you might handle a hypothetical situation are fine, but they're not nearly as instructive as being able to point to a real experience you've had and telling the story of what you learned from it. Stories are rich. They stick with people. They humanize statistics and data. They trigger emotional responses. Stories help us to recognize our common humanity. I promise you, from the interviewer side of the table, that a rich, relevant story will make your interview significantly more memorable. Now, that said, number 5, do not lie. Don't make up a story in the moment that you think the interviewer wants to hear, but that's not actually tethered to your experience. You may be a gifted improviser, but all human beings, not just those of us with theater degrees, have acute bullshit detectors. Sorry for the language. And a story that you make up on the spot that seems too neatly fitting and without sufficient detail will raise those suspicions. Extended beyond that, don't pretend to know more than you do. Don't cite a source that you're actually unfamiliar with. Nobody is expecting you to know everything about everything in an interview. Being able to say, I don't know, is actually a deeply vulnerable and quintessentially human thing. It is much preferable to someone who bloviates on and on about something and backs themselves into a corner. I'll tell you a true story. We had an interview for one of our recent institutes, and it was going badly. The finalist seemed to be reading things off the internet in response to an analytical question about a data set. Maybe he was reading ChatGPT, maybe it was a hasty Google search, but we were not fooled that the candidate was trying to read something and pass it off as his own original thought. So one of my colleagues changed tactics and asked if he liked to read any books. And he said that he did. So she asked what was one of his favorite books that he had read recently. He thought for a second, and then he said, To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a rather famous novel by the American author Harper Lee, if you're not familiar with it. Now, each of us on the faculty on the call have read To Kill a Mockingbird at one point or another in our schooling. So we said, well, hey, we like that book too. My colleague asked the candidate if he could share with us his favorite part of the book. And I think her intention was just to find some shared kinship and conversation around something that we could both talk comfortably about during an interview that wasn't going so well. And the candidate took a moment, and then he started reciting a plot description of To Kill a Mockingbird from somewhere on the internet. This was obvious to us in a number of ways. The sentences didn't seem to flow naturally in his speech. He tripped over some words in an otherwise coherent sentence, And he named the main character of the novel with her given birth name rather than the nickname which she is called over and over and over again throughout the novel. It was a really disappointing experience because if he just said, oh, it was actually many years ago that I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I really don't remember it well enough to speak candidly about it, then we would have probed for a different topic to talk about. But the audacity of pretending to pass off something online as an original thought that you're having is, at least in an academic setting like ours, it's akin to plagiarism. And plagiarism is disqualifying. And it's needless because, again, no one is expecting that you should know every source text imaginable. Now, I do have a caveat to this, and that's when you are specifically asked to review something before the interview to be in a position to speak about it during the interview. Sometimes we will ask finalists to review an article so that we can begin our conversation with your criticism or your analysis. For other programs, we don't do that. But whether you are assigned something or not, always, always, always do your homework to know as much as possible about the company or the school or the organization that you are interviewing with. These are often some of the most predictable and easily answered questions that you will be asked. Why do you want this job? Why do you want to work there? What is it about our work or our organization that intrigues you? Why do you think you would be a good fit? You do not want to be caught flat-footed in this answer. The people on the interviewer side of the table obviously know the organization and the opportunity quite intimately. And so if you're making it up because you don't really know what it is the organization values, that lack of preparation will be crystal clear, and it is not a good look. The worst part is not just that it appears that you didn't take the time to really research the opportunity that you're interviewing for. The worst part is that it may indicate that you don't really know what you want at all. Maybe you applied to this job or scholarship or program along with 30 or 50 others in a day, not because that they were all good fits for your talent and ambition, but just because you were casting about for something, anything, and it didn't matter what. The problem with that is that it's hard to hire someone who doesn't know what they want because they tend to not stick it out when they realize, oh, wait, I've just figured out that what I want is not this. So review the job description, review the program curriculum, ensure that you know the eligibility requirements. If there happens to be a frequently asked questions section on the program website, and hint, hint, if you're a finalist for one of our programs at Equitech Futures, there is such an FAQ section on each program page on our website. Well, be sure that you have read it. I'll give one other side note for the finalists for our institutes. Any of our alumni can readily attest that the program is a rather rigorous commitment. It is 3 hours of live coursework each day that we meet for anywhere between 8 and 10 consecutive weeks. That could be as much as 150 hours of live coursework, plus whatever time is needed to be allocated outside of class for the completion of assignments or capstone projects. So as you go into your interview, make sure that you've looked at your calendar for the program dates. They can be found on our website, equitechfutures.com, and ensure that you have the availability to make that commitment. Because I can assure you right now that you will be asked to articulate whatever conflicts and commitments you already have, which might keep you from being an engaged participant during the program timeframe. That is, unfortunately, the only question that I can promise you that you will be asked in an Equitech interview. The rest of the questions you'll be asked will be tailored to your application and your experience, and they will be asked by me and my colleagues on the faculty. Number 7, and this is a big piece of advice that my faculty colleagues have implored me to share with you because they otherwise find it so annoying. Please answer the question that you are asked. On some level, I get why interviewees may veer from this. They've given a lot of thought ahead of time to what stories and what experiences and what examples would make for good interview fodder. Maybe they've even taken notes that they can reference. And so they're coming into the interview looking for openings. When can they share this story? When can they talk about that award that they've won? When can they mention this internship or that job? It's all much ado about nothing if fitting it into your answer doesn't actually answer the question that you've been asked. Your interviewers have put plenty of thought into the questions that they're asking, and there may be something specific that they are trying to hear in your answer. Maybe they are curious about how you reckon with a data problem, or how forthright you'll be about an experience at school or at work, or any of a series of markers that your values match with the values of the program or the organization. And so, if you tell a story that you want to tell, but that doesn't actually get at that, it was all for naught. Because we are left wondering whether you didn't understand the question, or you weren't listening, or you didn't think that we would notice your sleight of hand, or more directly, your sleight of speech. But the question and answer probably did occupy 2 or 3 or 4 minutes that did not give the interviewers the information that they needed to make an affirmative decision on your candidacy. And so now they will either try to rephrase or reapproach, trying to get the answer that they are seeking. Now, what about if you didn't understand the question that was asked of you? There are a couple ways of handling this, both of them fine, but one of them has a little bit more grace to it. I will start with the grace-less one, and that's when someone says, "I'm sorry, can you please repeat the question?" You've probably heard that plenty. I call that grace-less because it provides no dialogue and no new information before kicking the ball back to the interviewer to ask the question again. It doesn't offer the interviewer any context of what was misunderstood and where the disconnect might have been. Worse, sometimes I've heard interviewees say, "Can you ask that question a different way?" Which literally has an opinion baked into it that I didn't understand, nor did I like the way the question was asked initially, so please do a better job next time of finding a way to communicate with me. I mean, you might get a rephrase of the question that allows you to understand an answer, but things got a little unnecessarily snippy in the process. In my Community Action Lab course, we play a game called Paraphrasing Connections, which is a technique for talking with someone who opposes the position that you are taking. As you can see on the screen there, the first person in that two-person dialogue makes a statement from their viewpoint, and then before responding, the second person has to paraphrase what the first person said, and at the end say, "Is that accurate?" The first person has to agree to the accuracy of what they've said. Otherwise, the second person has to try again. And when that first person agrees to the accuracy, then the second person can make a statement from their viewpoint. Rather than push back and forth, point, counterpoint, it asks the dialogue partners to slow down the conversation and restate what they thought they heard the other person say, and get their approval that that is what was said before they offer a rebuttal. Taken to the misunderstanding in the interview, if you can say something like, "I think I'm to understand that what you want to know is what book had a major impact on me in high school. Is that correct?" Now, maybe that's not what was being asked, but the interviewer now has much more information about where that miscommunication likely occurred, and they can rephrase their question in a way that makes the interviewee more comfortable and meets them where they're at. This strikes me as a much more mature dialogue than a tennis match back and forth. Now, after this masterclass, I would suggest that you do a web search for the most commonly asked questions in job interviews. These are questions like, what are your greatest strengths? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? How do you think others may describe you? Or the dreaded one, because it's so vague, tell me a little about yourself. Occasionally, but not always, some of these types of questions find their way into our finalist interviews for Equitech programs. Anytime you're going in for an interview for an opportunity, it's not a bad idea to review these common questions in advance and imagine how you might answer if you were asked. In the worst case scenario, you don't get asked these questions, but the exercise helped clarify your intentions around why you want the job and why you think you're well qualified for it. And sometimes, and I know this to be true because I work with managers across different industries with some frequency, managers will Google top 30 interview questions in the minutes before someone comes in to interview with them because they didn't have time to prepare for the interview. And therefore, the questions that you prepared for are the same ones that are staring back at them from their screen and that they're going to ask you. And then suddenly you look like an ace with all of your ready answers. Almost every opportunity is going to want to know that you can work well with others. Because let's face it, everyone has a manager, everyone has colleagues, and people hope that we will get to work with other nice people. After all, we spend an awful lot of our lives in that space. The energy we match with those around us should feel nourishing rather than draining. So think through your experiences of when collaboration has been challenging and how you got through it. What teams have felt right and why, what your values are, and how your personality fits with others in the workplace. I promise you, it is relevant. Now, the flip side of anticipating all these questions that you may be asked is that the interviewers aren't ideally the only ones asking questions during the time allotted. Your time is a precious resource. So is mine, so are my colleagues, so is everyone's time. None of us is promised infinite life here. So how you spend your time is as important as how you spend your money and your energy and your other resources. What I'm saying is that in an interview for an opportunity, don't lose sight of the fact that you're interviewing them too. You prepared for the interview. Did they prepare to interview you? Do your personalities seem like a match? Does the opportunity feel more exciting to you by the time you get to the end of the interview? Or are you less enthusiastic about it? You have to trust these instincts to know how to best allocate the time you have. And one of the best tests of that is to come to the interview with your own questions. I'm always surprised and a little disappointed when we come to the end of an interview and allocate time for the interviewee to ask us questions, and they say they don't have any. Really? We were so clear on our expectations, and you are so certain that it is everything you want, that you don't have anything you want to ask? Let your genuine curiosity be your guide here. And again, don't ask us what you think we want to hear. At the end of an Equitech program interview, don't ask me, hey, Thomas, how'd you get involved in studying theater? What's your favorite documentary? I mean, it's flattering to be asked, but it's also not the forum for my autobiography. Ask about the job, the program, the course, whatever seems unclear or needs reinforcement. Demonstrate that you are a curious person and make sure that the opportunity fits your own expectations. And if it doesn't, then keep looking for the job or the program that does. I have 2 more tips, and they're more about framing than they are about tactics. Take a deep breath before you begin. Now, any Equitech alumni who took my speaking lab course will tell you that the worst fears lie in anticipation. It's the moments right before an interview starts that your heart starts beating faster and your palms get a little sweaty and your breathing starts feeling shallow. These responses are all connected physiologically, and they can be reset with a slow, deep breath. Try it. Breathe in on the count of 4, and breathe out on a count of 4. If that didn't feel relaxing enough, see if you can inhale and exhale on a count of 8. Doctors will tell you that those deep breaths naturally slow your heart rate, relaxing your blood pressure, and bringing calm. Remember to banish the negative voice while you are waiting. Instead, remind yourself that you are talented, or else you wouldn't have received the invitation to interview. Enter the room as the best version of yourself, sharing who you are and hoping that the interviewers on the other side of the table are good matches for who you want to work with or learn from. And finally, when the interview is over, walk out believing the best version of the story. I will tell you what I mean by that. Several years ago, I was interviewing to work as a program director at an applied theater company in Chicago. The interview was 90 minutes long. They asked me a lot of questions about my experience. I asked them a lot of questions about the complexity of the job. And when it was almost over, they told me the timeline of when I would hear back from them. It felt like a good dialogue that we had had. I walked out of the room into a corridor where there were elevators or lifts to take me back down to the lobby. And while I was waiting for the elevator to arrive, less than a minute after I had left the room, I heard that room erupt in laughter. And I realized at that moment, I had two choices about how to interpret it. I could believe that they were laughing at me and that I had somehow made a fool of myself. Or I could believe that that laughter was a collective relief that they had found their program director, that I was the candidate who would solve their problem. Now, this was a Friday afternoon, and I knew I wouldn't hear further about the job until after the weekend. And so I chose to believe that that laughter was positive. After all, it was how I felt the dialogue went as I was leaving the room. Sure enough, on Monday morning, they called to offer me the job. Even though the interview was over, there was no use endlessly raking over what I had said or should have said differently. Believe that you did your best and that you hope the interviewers felt like it was a mutually beneficial match. And if you walk out of the interview less enthused about the opportunity than you were going in, then let it go. There are many jobs, many programs, and many more opportunities out there. Find the one that nourishes you and trust your gut about whether the opportunity feels right after you interview. If you are interviewing for an Equitech Futures program and you have questions either in advance of your interview or afterward, reach out to us at admissions@equitechfutures.com, and we will do our best to get back to you within 1 to 2 business days. On behalf of Equitech Futures, I'm Thomas Murray. I wish you good luck on your next interview, and I hope that you find the opportunity that matches your unique talents. Thanks for watching.